So what makes good journalism? Three things: sources, writing style, and what we'll call aesthetics. My mentor in journalism, Dr. Bradley Wilson at Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls, Texas, believes 3 is a magic number. That is, it takes 3 sources to tell an objective news story. 1 source to tell one side, 1 to tell another side, and 1 to break the tie. While the number of sources needed to tell a complete story can vary widely depending on the topic and length of the story, 3 sources is indeed an excellent benchmark. Now, the more sources you use, the better your reporting will be. Now, you already know it's because sources provide depth for a story. More sources equal more information and insight to share with your readers. Sources also provide context, as readers broaden their understanding when journalists approach a topic from different points of view. And finally, sources provide reliability for a story. Now, a source can sometimes provide a journalist with bad information, whether a source is just mistaken or outright lying. Having multiple sources in a story decreases the risk of information being inaccurate or biased. Now, quotes and paraphrases from those sources, whether they're actually people or from documents, show the reader that the journalist is actually reporting. The Society for Professional Journalists Code of Ethics calls for journalists to use original sources whenever possible and to identify all sources clearly. The code reads, quote, "The public is entitled to as much information as possible to judge the reliability and motivations of sources," end quote. Stories without any sources might not be fake news, but they certainly aren't good journalism. The next thing that separates quality journalism from not so quality journalism is the story's writing style. As I'm sure you know by now, real journalists adhere to the Associated Press style. Now, while the typical news consumer won't memorize AP style rules, an information-savvy person will notice if a story is riddled with spelling and grammar mistakes, uses all caps, or switches font style or size in the middle of a paragraph. These would all suggest the lack of a qualified copy editor, which is a major red flag in determining whether a story might be fake news. Now, this is one of the reasons that blogs are seen as less credible overall than traditional news outlets, as in many instances, bloggers are their own copy editors. Now, the more eyes see a story before it's published, the more style and factual errors can be corrected. Now, editors can also help remove instances of biased language, especially from novice reporters. You should be able to read any news story on a controversial topic and not be able to tell how the person who wrote it feels, as a good journalist's personal viewpoint is always kept out of the story. Conservatives should cover liberals the same way they cover conservatives, and vice versa. Now, NPR's Code of Ethics warns that politically charged language not only violates the organization's commitment to be fair, but it can actually prevent them from telling good stories, because it causes readers to question whether they're biased in favor of a specific side. Now, the code points to words like reform of tax or healthcare, which could be construed to mean that something is broken and needs to be fixed. NPR advises a word like overhaul instead. Now, I've heard NPR reporters joke that as long as they get an equal number of complaints that they're biased against a particular side, they're doing a good job. Now, at this point, I want to draw attention to the difference between a news story and an opinion piece. Now, opinion columnists are allowed and even encouraged to address controversial topics and how they personally feel about them. But opinion columns must always be clearly labeled as such and are relegated to the opinion section of a newspaper. Now, for stories posted online, it's not always as clear what section of a print newspaper the story would belong in. So the first thing an information-savvy person should do is check the beginning and end of an article to see if it's labeled as an opinion piece. Now, opinion writers are also typically not allowed to write for other sections of the newspaper or news outlet to help avoid real or apparent bias in news stories. Finally, a reputable news site will contain a few elements I'll group under the term site aesthetics. First, authentic news stories should always list a byline, which is the name of the story's author, or at minimum the word staff report, to indicate it was a collaborative effort. The byline indicates someone is taking editorial responsibility for what is published. Lack of a byline can indicate an attempt to mask the author's identity. The credentials of the author should also be available, whether it's staff writer, assistant sports editor, or guest columnist. Second, a reputable news site should always list an About Us page with contact information for at least the editor-in-chief and section editors, if not for individual writers. True journalists value transparency and often emulate the high level of openness that they expect from government and other public bodies. The About page is also where you would find whether a website is satirical, and they should also link to social media pages. Third, the website, just like any print newspaper, should have a designated section to run corrections. Journalists are human and sometimes they mess up. They misquote someone, get a fact wrong, or leave information out that could clarify an issue. The standards and ethics of the New York Times states, quote, "Because our voice is loud and far-reaching, the Times recognizes an ethical responsibility to correct all of its factual errors, large and small," end quote. It took me about 15 seconds to find the corrections page on NewYorkTimes.com, right at the bottom of the homepage as the last item under the news header.